From people who became psychotic upon visiting Jerusalem to others who became convinced they are cows. Here are 10 of the strangest mental disorders. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to They Will Kill You. Hit the like button and request any topics you'd like to learn about in the comments section below. Number 10. Jerusalem Syndrome. Jerusalem Syndrome refers to several mental phenomena that some people experience upon visiting the city of Jerusalem and has been described as a form of religious psychosis. It has been explained as a superimposition on an already present mental disorder, but in its best known form, it typically refers to a person that was mentally balanced who became psychotic after arriving in Jerusalem. It has affected Christians, Jews, and Muslims of various backgrounds. Thus, it isn't religion specific. The psychosis has an intense religious theme and a pattern of behavior has been identified. It includes, among others, an obsession with being clean and pure, the preparation of a toga-like gown, often made from hotel linen, the need to sing hymns or shout Bible verses, and the delivery of a sermon in a holy place. The disorder also involves the paranoid belief that the symptoms experienced by the sufferer are the result of poisoning or medicating by a secret Jerusalem Syndrome agency. According to one study, between 1980 and 1993, around 1,200 tourists were severely stricken by mental problems related to Jerusalem Syndrome and had to be taken to hospital. Sufferers normally recover within a couple of weeks after being removed from the area. Number 9. Erotomania. This is classified as a subtype of delusional disorder and refers to an individual becoming convinced that another person is in love with him or her. The delusion usually occurs over a person that is unattainable, whether due to disinterest, marriage, or high financial or social status. The object of the sufferer's obsession may also be deceased, imaginary, or a person they've never met. The onset of erotomania is often sudden. Delusions may include a conviction that the secret admirer is sending the sufferer messages through body posture, colors, license plates, or various clues in the media if they're a public figure. The sufferer may exhibit stalker-like behavior that can turn violent. One example is the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan by John Hinckley Jr., reportedly driven by an erotomanic obsession with actress Jodie Foster, whom he was trying to impress. Number 8. Taijin kyofusho. This mental disorder is Japanese culture specific and roughly translates as a fear of interpersonal relations. People who suffer from it are incredibly embarrassed about themselves and afraid of displeasing others with their appearance or even through their basic body functions. Whether it's an odor, an action, or the way they look, sufferers don't want to embarrass, harm, or offend other people with their presence. It's a culture-bound syndrome that most likely arose from the great emphasis placed on keeping up appearances and social etiquette by traditional Japanese culture. Taijin kyofusho is more common in men and it may be triggered by personal trauma or act as a defense mechanism. Aside from experiencing feelings of dread and panic whenever people are around, sufferers may also encounter symptoms such as trembling, rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, or panic attacks. Number 7. Abulamania. This condition can severely affect a person's ability to function socially and is usually associated with stress, anxiety, and depression. Abulamania is best described as a mental disorder in which one suffers from crippling indecisiveness. Even though most people struggle with making certain choices in their lives, only for abulamaniacs does it become an obsession. For many of them, the decision-making process turns into paralysis by analysis, meaning that indecision basically stops them from moving forward in their lives. For people who suffer from this disorder, the simplest choices may become a type of mental prison. Number 6. Capgras Delusion. People who suffer from Capgras Delusion become convinced that someone close to them, whether a friend or family member or even a pet, has been replaced by an identical imposter. It has been observed in people with brain damage, but it most commonly occurs in people suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. It has also been associated with neurodegenerative diseases, especially in older people. In an isolated experiment, Capgras Delusion was induced through the drug ketamine in a healthy subject. But the effect was temporary. The name of the disorder comes from French psychiatrist Joseph Capgras, who first described it in 1923. His reference case was a woman identified as Madame Macabre, who believed that her spouse and other people she knew had been replaced by doubles. Number 5. Paris Syndrome. The French capital has been the subject of many works of art, music, and literature, and people who visit it usually expect to have a great time. While most tourists are able to manage the highs and lows of the City of Light, others tend to crumble when the real Paris doesn't match their expectations. This disorder is known as Paris Syndrome and is characterized by several psychiatric symptoms, including delusional states, anxiety, hallucinations, and feelings of persecution. People afflicted by it tend to perceive themselves as victims of prejudice, aggression, or hostility. Other symptoms may include sweating, dizziness, rapid heartbeat, or vomiting. Japanese tourists seem to be particularly susceptible, with around 20 being stricken each year. President of the Franco-Japanese Medical Association, Mario Renaud, argued at one point that this is due to the distorted image of Paris presented in the Japanese media, particularly the magazines. According to him, they make the city look like a place dominated by stick-thin models and women dressed in high-fashion brands. Number 4. Autophagy. Although not officially recognized as a mental disorder, autophagy may be classified as an impulse control disorder. This means that sufferers fail to resist the drive of doing something that causes harm to themselves or others. That's particularly horrifying when considering that autophagy essentially means eating one's own body. A person with this disorder is compelled to inflict pain by biting or devouring parts of their own body. Doing this may cause them to experience relief, pleasure, or gratification, and once the action is completed, they may or may not experience regret or guilt. Autophagy has been associated with psychosis and schizophrenia. Similar disorders include trichophagia, the compulsion to eat one's own hair, or onychophagia, eating one's own fingernails or toenails. Number 3. Stendhal Syndrome. Upon visiting Florence's Basilica of Santa Croce, where Galileo Galilei, Michelangelo, and Niccolò Machiavelli are buried, French writer Stendhal was overcome with emotion. He wrote, "Absorbed in the contemplation of sublime beauty, I reached a point where one encounters celestial sensations. Everything spoke so vividly to my soul." This was more than a gifted author describing the wonders of Florence. Stendhal goes on to mention reactions such as dizziness, confusion, and a rapid heartbeat. His experience would eventually be known as Stenhole Syndrome or Florence Syndrome. It typically occurs when people are viewing pieces of art that have great personal significance to them. Overwhelmed by emotion, some may faint or have hallucinations. Even though psychiatrists have debated the existence of the disorder, there have been numerous cases of tourists fainting or becoming dizzy while taking in the Tuscan city's artistic treasures. Whether they'd seen Michelangelo's David or the masterpieces at the Uffizi Gallery, some of them even had to be taken to hospital. Even though some question the syndrome's existence, there is scientific evidence that exposure to artworks activates the same areas of the brain that are involved in emotional reactions. Number 2. Coltar Delusion. Neurologist Jules Coltar once wrote about a case involving a woman identified only as Miss X. Her delusion was that she'd been eternally damned and couldn't die a natural death. Miss X denied her need to eat and the existence of certain parts of her body. Coltar called it the delirium of negation, and during the course of suffering from it, the woman ultimately starved to death. Coltar's delusion is quite possibly the scariest disorder on this list, but fortunately it's very rare. This mental disorder means that the sufferer believes that he or she is already dead, actively decaying, or doesn't even exist. Sufferers may also believe they have lost all their internal organs or all their blood. Aside from severe delusions, the disorder is also characterized by psychotic depression. The case studies are quite terrifying. One boy suffering from Coltar wouldn't respond to any pleasurable stimuli and said that everyone and everything, including trees, was dead. He referred to himself as a dead boy and warned that the world was hours away from complete destruction. In another case, a man developed Coltar following traumatic brain injury. He became convinced that he died of AIDS or septicemia, that he'd taken his mother's spirit to see what hell looked like, and that she was actually asleep while all this was happening. Number 1. Bowenthropy. A person that suffers from the strange psychological disorder known as Bowenthropy believes that he or she is a bovine. The roots of this disorder are pretty hard to determine. Some argue that it may be a consequence of hypnotism or some form of suggestion. According to the writings of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, there's a possibility that such a disorder starts as a dream that persists to the point of becoming a full-blown delusion. As bizarre as Bowenthropy might sound, there are some examples from historical tradition. According to the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar II, king of Babylon, was driven from men and did eat grass as oxen. Persian traditions speak about Prince Majd al-Dawla, who was delusional in believing he was a cow. He made the same sounds as the animal and asked to be slaughtered so that his flesh could be consumed. Thankfully, he was eventually cured by Avicenna, a Persian polymath often considered to be the father of early modern medicine. Thanks for watching. What mental disorder do you think was the strangest? Let us know in the comments section below.